I believe the Attorney General of New York is going to get charged by the feds here criminally.
It's just not a good look. It's not a good look for a sitting elected official in New York State or any other state.
I will be shocked if she is not charged. This is Letitia James, literally earlier this month, this is number 2, at a National Action Network luncheon where she's threatening more lawsuits against Donald Trump.
So I've got to rush back to the office because you know that there's nothing more close to my heart than a lawsuit. And so you tell Donald Trump the lawsuit's coming. It's just a matter of hours. It's coming.
Dennis, good to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Dan, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to join you.
How big a deal do you think this is?
Dan, frankly, I think it's a really big deal. And that's not necessarily a commentary on how this referral plays out. I think that there's a lot of turf that needs to be covered yet between now and the Department of Justice making a decision. But even assuming that the Department of Justice decides not to bring any criminal charges against her, for these mortgage applications, it's a really big deal because she's the Attorney General of the state of New York, and if nothing else happens, in my estimation, just the mere allegations and the reference to the document, the power of attorney that she signed, that said that her principal residence was going to be this home in Norfolk, Virginia. It's just not a good look. It's not a good look for a sitting elected official in New York State or any other state to claim that their principal residence in a document that's being offered to a financial institution, that the principal residence is in some other state. It's not a good look because of what, some of the dynamics that you've raised. I mean, she's made similar allegations in the context of the lawsuit that ended up costing Trump over $400 million in a judgment, and there's still an appeal ongoing there. So we don't know what that final chapter is going to look like. But if nothing else happens, if there's no charges, the referral just is dead on arrival, it's just not a good look for the Attorney General of the state of New York.
All right, so I think you have done the best case scenario for Attorney General Letitia James, which is it's a bad look. I don't see how, knowing this administration and seeing what we've seen from this Attorney General, that this Attorney General is not going to charge Letitia James after getting this referral. Do you disagree?
Well, look, I don't disagree with what you just said. And again, I'm not forecasting an outcome here. I think it makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, I really don't like phrases like the weaponization of justice or lawfare. But in reality, what happened to Donald Trump in New York in 2024 and in late 2023 in the context of the Alvin Bragg indictment, and then Letitia James's lawsuit over, him overvaluing his real estate assets. One has to look objectively at those prosecutions as being politically motivated. The civil prosecution by Attorney General James and the criminal prosecution by Alvin Bragg to take offenses that arguably were no more than misdemeanor offenses beyond the statute of limitations, but he cobbled them together in such a fashion to get beyond the statute of limitations to bring felony charges against Trump. Mm-hmm. There were no compelling reasons. And you said it a few moments ago in the context of the civil lawsuit that, while other business people may have engaged in the same conduct, their last names weren't Trump, so they were not going to be sued by Letitia James for the same conduct. In that case, it's important to point out that Trump's lawyers in that civil lawsuit over the valuation of property issue They made a motion to dismiss based upon, her statements during her campaign in 2018 when she was running for Attorney General in 2018. Yeah. So before she had any subpoena power, before she looked at a lick of evidence, she was on the campaign trail saying that she was going to get Donald Trump. Of course, the judge disagreed and didn't dismiss the charges based upon what appeared to be selective enforcement. But she's had a history of, for whatever reason, I don't know the personal or political history between the two of them, but the Attorney General has had a history going back to her initial campaign of targeting Donald Trump. And maybe because in New York City, it's smart politics to target Donald Trump.
I completely agree with you. I have been critical, very critical of the Manhattan criminal case. And as you just heard, somewhat critical of the New York civil case brought by Letitia James. But it is unforgivable, in my view, that she campaigned saying she was going to go after him and then went after him. And that is why, certainly from a sort of karmic point of view, I have no sympathy for her. Her legal defenses are, interesting, but I do not see how she does not get charged here. And she is. I'm going to play another piece of sound. This is literally from 2 weeks ago.
But all of us who believe in the promise of America, who want a society built on the rule of law, and who are committed to equal justice, responsible for speaking out, resisting, and using every available tool at our disposal to protect our fragile democracy. And I can think of no better partner than with Nan and I in a coalition of attorneys general, 23 of us strong all across this nation. We've been working to fight and defend America's rights from the onslaught by the Trump administration, to oppose the manipulation and the reinterpretation of our laws and our Constitution, and we have been winning.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know exactly what she's talking about, but I will tell you that I have been very critical of what the Trump administration has been doing. I can both be very critical of what the Trump administration has been doing as a legal perspective, and also be critical of Letitia James for what is starting to sound like rank hypocrisy. But let me ask Dennis Vacco, former Attorney General, Republican of New York. But again, just know that to get elected in New York as a Republican, you can't be too conservative. But Dennis, let me ask you about the defenses that it seems that her team has laid out to the New York Times. And we're going to take your calls, by the way, at 866-967-6887 for the former Attorney General of New York, Dennis Vacco. So she's basically saying that when it comes to the loan application and putting it as her primary residence, that on a separate loan application form, she indicated she did not intend to occupy the prime property as a primary residence. Her mortgage agreement did not require her to do so. What do you make of that defense?
Well, I'd like to see the document and the exact phraseology, what she was attesting to in that document. It seems to me that that's another document where, she has to, speak truthfully, or at least attest truthfully. So it's curious because she sets up the juxtaposition of, okay, well, I made a misrepresentation in document A, but then I made a different representation in document B. I get it. I think it does cloud the issue, but I'm not so sure that it absolves her from the initial initial misstatement.
Yeah. And again, the question was her stating that, it just seems to me so incredibly dumb that it's hard to believe, right? That the sitting Attorney General of New York would list her principal residence in Virginia, knowing that she's stepping into a beehive, right? A hornet's nest, whatever you want to call it, with regard to Trump. I guess I'm not quite yet giving her the benefit of the doubt, because it seems to me so ridiculous that you would think you could get away with that.
Look, I don't know what her intention was when she signed that power of attorney claiming that this home in Virginia was going to be her principal residence. But, everything happens in context, right, Dan? I mean, it the context of that document, it's 2023. Joe Biden is the president. 2023, it's in her mind, Joe Biden is going to be reelected president, and she's doing all that she can in 2023 to prevent Donald J. Trump from being elected president. So, and it's in Virginia. Who's going to be looking at this document? Who's going to be even aware that she's buying this home in Virginia? So, again, I don't know what her intentions were, but I'm pointing to the atmospherics that surrounded, her conduct in 2023. If she indeed did sign that power of attorney, which it looks like she did, where she attested that this was going to be her personal residence, perhaps she thought that it was never going to be uncovered. I don't know. I mean, I don't know about the second document that her office is citing. And by the way, Dan, just as an aside, as you were at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned how her office now is providing information to the New York Times. Quite frankly, I think that's a mistake. I think that it's a mistake that she is now using her office to be proffering information about this investigation to the New York Times. If I'm the Department of Justice, I'm sending subpoenas to her office now. Why is she making people that work for her potential witnesses in the Department of Justice investigation? To me, that's just simply a bad move on her part.
It's a really good point.
She should be using, I know that she doesn't want to necessarily lawyer up. She wants to be careful with the impression that she's lawyered up. But I think that it's a mistake on her part to be employing the resources of the Attorney General's office to be responding to these allegations. And if I'm Pam Bondi, I want to know who those people are because I want to send them subpoenas.
Talking to Dennis Vacco, the former Attorney General of New York, a Republican. So then the other issue is that she misrepresented the number of units in a Brooklyn home she purchased in 2001, possibly to receive better interest rates. Wouldn't the statute of limitations be expired on something from 2001?
Well, is she still making payments on that financing? And if she's still making payments on it, then the statute of limitations extends.
Good point.
I mean, unless she's paid it off, and she paid it off, beyond the statute of limitations. But if she's still making payments on, and it's my understanding that she still owns that property, so if she's still making payments on that underlying financing, then the statute of limitations is not dead.
Yeah. The month before Letitia James filed her lawsuit against Trump, various complaints were filed with the New York City Department of Buildings, several of them related to the number of units in the home. None of those complaints have resulted in penalties thus far. One of the complaints in October of 2024 asked why Ms. James, quote, was not being prosecuted for fraud and filing false documents. The Buildings Department has resolved 9 of the 10 complaints. The 10th, which was submitted late last month, remains open. What is the significance of the New York City Department of Buildings in this regard?
Well, it's my distant impression that there are also some permitting requirements, for the permitting requirements that are different for a 5-unit apartment building versus a 4-unit. So I think the significance is she offering to the city of New York through, the building enforcement office or what have you, is she's submitting documents that are inaccurate, if not false.
And if she were to be prosecuted, obviously she would have to have a private attorney, right? There would be no government protection that would pay for her attorney.
Well, that's an interesting question. There's I don't know whether it's illustrative or not, but there's a civil lawsuit right now against Andrew Cuomo, brought by the state trooper, the former state trooper. I don't know if she still is a trooper or not, but
that was for his actions as governor.
That's correct. That was,
right.
But my point is, under public officers law in New York State, right now he is being covered under the public officers law for the cost of his defense. Now, does she have And by the way, curiously, the official who initially decides whether or not the public officers law provides the cost of defense is the attorney general. So I think it's a stretch because the allegations here are such that, how does she connect her official duties to these allegations? So I do think that she needs to, if she's going to properly manage this, as I mentioned a moment ago, I think it's a mistake that she's using the resources of her office at the moment. But if she's going to properly manage this, she's going to need independent outside counsel. Now, of course, I think that she could probably pay for that outside counsel under New York State election law from her campaign kitty, if you will. But I think she needs independent outside counsel to adequately represent her interest in this investigation.
I believe the Attorney General of New York is going to get charged by the feds here criminally. I think this is going to be a big deal. I think it is a case that is being undercovered right now, even in the right-wing media. I've been surprised that this hasn't gotten more attention.
I am going to use the law both as a sword and as a shield and challenge Donald Trump. And each and every time he issues an illegal executive order, I am going to stand up to him because he represents to me sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity.
Now, the Attorney General of New York, Letitia James, who you're just listening to there from a couple of weeks ago, is now in the firing line herself. And I'm not talking about the political firing line. She is in the possible legal firing line, which with a referral that has been made to the Attorney General from the Director of Federal Housing Finance Agency, who is basically saying that she is engaged in mortgage fraud. And I will be shocked if she is not charged. I'll just put it that way. I will be shocked if she's not charged. And I am making no judgment about the strength of the case. I don't know enough about the case to tell you whether it's a strong case or not a strong case. But with that referral and the facts as he lays them out, knowing that Donald Trump is now going hand in hand with the Department of Justice in a way that we've never seen before, I expect that it is almost certain that this DOJ is going to end up charging her. And it is something that I'm surprised has not been getting more attention out there. We're talking to Dennis Vacco, the former New York State Attorney General from 1995 to 99. He is the last Republican to have been elected into that position. All right, so Dennis, talk to us about timing here. So there's a referral made, right? Talk to us about what that means, how the process plays out in terms of the decision-making, timing, et cetera.
Well, Dan, you've been around the block a long time, so you know just as well as I do that referral did not come as a surprise to Pam Bondi. So my suspicion is that there was some interagency discussion before the letter was written and signed and transmitted. So it's not that this comes as a surprise to the Department of Justice, but I think that the next steps here now are to analyze the documents that were sent. And I'm not disputing at all your sense that there's going to be an indictment here, even though and this is not an expression by me of the value of the evidence or otherwise, but the U.S. attorneys, the prosecutors, always have a level of discretion, and that discretion should be not only in terms of the four corners of the case, but how the public's confidence in the justice system is going to receive a decision that the prosecutor is going to make. And even though Letitia James and Alvin Bragg didn't care about the public's impression of justice when they charged Donald Trump, former president, when they brought an indictment against a presidential candidate, they weren't cognizant, that seemingly they were not cognizant of the impact of their decisions on the public's trust in our judicial system. So to ask Pam Bondi to engage in that same level of deliberation might be a bridge too far. Even though Pam Bondi, I know Pam Bondi, she's a very smart lawyer. She was a great attorney general in Florida. She was a county prosecutor, state prosecutor in Florida. She's smart and capable. But whether or not she is going to exercise discretion as she thinks about the broader ramifications of bringing these charges remains to be seen. But even as I said earlier, the damage here is going to occur even if charges are not brought. In my
well, let me that actually raises an interesting question that I've been thinking about a lot. I've known Pam Bondi for years. I've always liked Pam Bondi. I've always respected her, but I have been disappointed in some of what I've seen of her, her lack of independence. And I say that in terms of some of the choices she's making, of the questions she won't answer. It is obvious that she is not reining in President Trump. And even on something like, for example, the arson at the Pennsylvania governor's home, she doesn't want to call that domestic terrorism, but she wants to call attacks at Tesla dealerships domestic terrorism. I mean, that's a perfect example to me of Pam Bondi sadly giving up the intellectual consistency that I would have hoped we've seen from her to placate Donald Trump. Do you disagree?
Well, my knee-jerk reaction to that is the SWAT team raid on Mar-a-Lago, which we never heard Joe Biden being accused of playing a role in that raid. It seemingly,
but he didn't. I mean, but you're not actually going to compare. I mean, the level of insistence on loyalty from Donald Trump is different than we've ever seen before. And Merrick Garland initially didn't prosecute Trump for January 6th. The only reason he ended up getting prosecuted was because of the classified documents, because a special counsel was appointed. Merrick Garland was getting a ton of heat from the left saying, prosecute him, prosecuting. Why are you not prosecuting Trump for January 6th? And he didn't do it. And it was only when the classified documents happened and a special counsel got appointed that eventually that case went forward. So I think it's an unfair comparison to say, oh, well, why are people talking about Donald Trump hand in hand with the AG now when they weren't talking about it with Biden and Merrick Garland?
Well, I'm going to disagree with you about the necessity of the raid, and that's what I'm pointing to. So my commentary isn't on the efficacy of the investigation, but did they really need to execute a SWAT team search warrant at 6 a.m. at the former president's residence in a document case where he was already lawyered up, where there was already dialogue back and forth about whether or not the documents were indeed, confidential or otherwise. So there was an ongoing dialogue, and what I'm pointing to was the raid.
All right, let's talk about that then. I mean, just because it's fun and interesting. So taking the scenario that we now know of what happened, right? Which is, yes, the lawyers have been in contact. Yes, it's not just negotiations. They've been trying to get back these classified documents, which they've identified as classified. They knew certain documents that literally were not returned. The lawyers first hand them a box of documents in December and say, this is everything we have. Okay, thank you. Then they realize, oh, no, actually, there are hundreds of documents still missing. And they go back to them. And the entity responsible for chronicling these documents goes back to them and says finally to the FBI, they won't give them back. We don't know what else to do. All right, so they go to the FBI. The FBI starts engaging in negotiations to get the documents back. They then eventually get a sworn affidavit with more documents, right? Now, additional documents along with a sworn affidavit that this is it. There are no more documents. We promise that this is it. You're right. After rounds of going back and forth, the lawyers are now assuring them that there's nothing left. And they then learn that's not true. They learn that they've been lied to again. What should they do?
I think they could have gone to court.
At court to do what? I mean, to say, instead of, but if they'd gone to court, Trump would have hid them and gotten rid of them. I mean, the concern was that he was going to hide them because he'd been hiding them for as long as he had. That's why, you know this better than me, this is why people go in and they have a raid, right? They're worried someone's going to destroy documents. And in this case, they were worried he was going to hide or destroy documents, which seems to me like it was a fair concern.
Look, I disagree with the tactical step of the raid.
All right.
I get your point that that your vantage point is that they were left with no other option, and I'm not sure that that's accurate.
Yeah. Look, I can't be sure of anything, right? I mean, I'm always wrong. But that's my assessment that the classified documents case. See, you and I are on the same page largely. It sounds like about the New York cases. But when it comes to the classified documents case, it really does seem to me that at that point the DOJ had no choice, and he had sort of boxed in Merrick Garland, who up to that point, and look, I was on this show regularly saying I did not want Garland to prosecute him for January 6th. That I thought it was a bad idea. That despite the fact that there was wrongdoing, et cetera, and that I thought that the president engaged in wrongdoing, I did not want to see a prosecution. And one of the effects of this, and I think this goes to your point about New York, has been that all of the prosecutions helped Donald Trump politically, meaning that, and most importantly, the Manhattan case, meaning I have said that I think that Alvin Bragg brought that case not to help Joe Biden, but to help himself, because he was worried about the heat he was getting for not having brought the fraud case. There was a new book out that had criticized him for not bringing a fraud case against Donald Trump. He's feeling the heat, so he responds by bringing this other case, this garbage case that he ended up bringing. And as a result, Donald Trump gets more popular. And there's a reason Donald Trump was showing up in court for the civil case when he didn't have to, because It was good politics.
Well, the narrative was that during the campaign is that he was a felon, convicted 34 times, 34 times over. So I do think, I don't know who was. I don't even think Kamala Harris was using that as a campaign. I think that was the far left mostly saying, "Oh, this guy's a convicted felon." Look, because anyone in my view, and look, this is politics now. We're shifting from law to politics, but anyone in my view who was taking the position that that's a good campaign message was completely out of touch. Because it helped him.
It absolutely helped him. It 100%. I said the day, and I said it on this show, the day that Alvin Bragg indicted Donald Trump, I said this is going to be the greatest gift to Donald Trump politically that he has had thus far. Period.
I think you're right.
I mean, it's hard to believe, and here we are.
But that was before Butler.
Yes, that was before Butler. It's
right.
True. But I think, look, I don't think Butler is what elected Donald Trump. It helped. But I think the beginning of the end for Democrats was the Alvin Bragg case. That was the beginning of the end, when there was this sense that the priorities were wrong, that's not what people cared about, that they felt that Donald Trump was the victim. And we've seen this, look, in other countries and other situations, when people try to use the courts as a political weapon, it backfires. It is not effective. And so, and again, I'm someone also who has said that when it comes to weaponization of the DOJ under Merrick Garland, I have pointed out that there were more Democrats prosecuted high profile by this DOJ than there were Republicans. And that I don't buy that argument. But the Trump cases in New York and elsewhere are another issue. All right, so I've taken us on a.
So
on
what
a
we're at, but just to put
please.
there's a bow on this. So what we're suggesting that Attorney General Bondi do is what Attorney General James has not done, and that is to exercise a level of independence and discretion in terms of her evaluation of this case.
Right. Well, look, but that doesn't mean she shouldn't prosecute, right? I mean, so, because you and I both, I think, are being a little careful here because we don't know enough, right? To be able to say, oh, she ought to prosecute or we don't know enough at this point to be able to make that decision. But I think we agree that we hope that she will evaluate this based on the evidence and
That's
she
what
will.
I'm saying.
Yes. I don't think she's going to. I wish it. I hope she would. I fear she won't. But it also sounds bad for Letitia James, as you said at the outset, even if there is no prosecution here, that this is probably not good news for her.